I researched so much more for this video than I actually needed. Hey, it's Cecil, and it's Tuesday. Close enough, you know? Today we are back with another lore talk, which is super exciting for me. We have a PowerPoint presentation, and we're gonna get into it. Today we are talking about Vennessa, the Dandelion Knight, the Lion Fang Knight, the Dandelion Gladiator. She is one of the historical figures from Genshin Impact, and I have always been intrigued by her story because it gets mentioned quite a few times when, you're involved with Mondstadt characters, but I wanted to know more, and so I did a dive, and now you guys are gonna know more too. So first things first, who was she? She was, like I said, also called the Dandelion Knight or the Lion Fang Knight. She was the first Grandmaster of the Knights of Favonius. That's the kind of group that oversees the security of Mondstadt. But before then, she was actually a big part of the Second Revolution in Mondstadt's somewhat recent history. I guess if you count a couple thousand years recent, I don't know, against the tyrannical aristocracy. So if you'll remember, like, Eula and her story, her family were aristocrats, and they basically had this like totalitarian rule over Mondstadt where they would keep slaves, and they were dictators. They weren't good, and their whole reason for being dictators was because we're rich and you're not. And that sucks. But why? Well, I mean, I did just tell you. But who was she? What led to her taking part in the revolution? I'm so glad you asked. So, first things first, let's talk about the Maraudans. If you go back about 1,000 years and then just a little bit further, the Maraudans were a nomadic tribe that wandered the lands of Tibet. They used to worship the god Marada, who is the current Pyro Archon and the goddess of war, but over time they focus more on passing down their traditions of combat and survival rather than passing down their history. So by the time you get to 1,000 years ago, Vennessa's generation, if you tell them about Marada, there's a good chance that they're gonna be like, who? Vennessa was born to that tribe, and her family's wanderings brought them to Mondstadt, as will happen. The reason being Ursa the Drake. Ursa the Drake was a draconic creature that plagued Mondstadt around the time that Vennessa lived, all the way up until 4 years before the game start, because its attack was a big part of what led to Creepus, Diluc's father, dying. So, Ursa's been around for a while, causing problems. When Vennessa and her tribe were traveling, Ursa stalked and chased them for 4 days straight. Naturally, they fled, and that led them all of the way to Mondstadt City, where they thought once they were within the city gates, surely they would be safe from the dragon, and they were, but instead, the aristocracy enslaved them. Very Rome core. Vennessa specifically was taken in as a battle slave. She was held hostage and forced to fight in Mondstadt's Colosseum of sorts for the entertainment of the aristocracy. From what we can tell based on some artifact reading and just in game context, it seems like a lot of aristocrats would have held slaves for gladiator purposes. The one tale other than Vennessa who stands out the most is the unnamed gladiator, and his story is somewhat touched on in the Gladiator's Finale artifact set, as well as if you read the Deathmatch weapon lore. Gladiator's Finale is one of the artifact sets that you get just like by fighting bosses as per normal in the world. And Deathmatch is the Battle Pass Spear. He was the previously undefeated champion of the Gladiators, and belonged to Eberhard Landrich, most likely. He was an Eberhard, not the unnamed gladiator, was an illegitimate heir to the family, and he has a pretty interesting story, but I think we'll touch on him another day. Eberhard manipulated the unnamed gladiator to continue fighting in the Colosseum far long after his time was done, right? Like, he was old, he had earned his freedom, etc. But the aristocracy, not exactly known for keeping their promises, right? So when the gladiators would fight, they were bound by shackles, and we actually see these shackles quite a bit. If you're leveling up weapons and you go into the Mondstadt weapon domain, um, every few days, we've got the scene up at the corner of the this way, scene up at the corner of the screen. We've got the different gladiator shackles. Vennessa the Lion Fang. For 10 years, Vennessa was enslaved, and she was undefeated in the Colosseum. She fought under the promise, as many of them did, that one day she would have earned freedom for herself, but also for her family. And if the unnamed gladiator is anything to go off of, I'm pretty sure we all know that is bullshit. She defeated the unnamed gladiator, so became the new undefeated champion, and numerous others, of course. It's noted in the description of shackles of the Dandelion gladiator, that would be these silver ones up here, that Vennessa was never really bound by her chains. She could have broken free of them at any point in time, but she chose to stay captive for the sake of her family and the hope that her duty to her family would lead to them being freed. And this is because, and this is what it says, um, I can't remember if it's in the shackle lore or if it was somewhere else. But Mondstadt doesn't have any particularly sturdy ore to craft the chains, and if you have actually like played the game, you'll know that like Mondstadt has the least interesting ore. There's a lot of like the iron chunks, but those are pretty easy to get into. There's like the rare crystal. But as long as you have like a claymore or zhongli, you can break them. When I read that, I thought that that was like a nice little detail because it ties into like the reality of what we see in the game. Anyways, insert Barca Lawrence, Sir Dickface. I hate him. I hate him. I think he's a little creep. I think he is a deeply unpleasant little man. Barca is one of Eula's ancestors, and he was the heir to the Lawrence clan. He was a spoiled brat. He was, oh, he was deeply unpleasant. He was the one who was like, hey, instead of having games for Ludi Harpastum every year, why don't we just skip to the good part? Uh, which is when some chosen Harpastum maiden would throw the Harpastum into the crowd. And then the tradition was whoever caught it was given blessings for a year and great rewards. Barca made it so that only he was allowed to touch the Harpastum, and then whoever the maiden was that year would be taken home with him against their will. Like I said, he's a creep. He's deeply unpleasant. He's gross. Vennessa's sister, Lind, she has been sick for possibly before they got to Mondstadt, but definitely while they were in Mondstadt. By the time of Ludi Harpastum, she went out to buy medicinal herbs to, bring to her sister to take care of her. Venti, Barbados, ran into her while fleeing the scene after ticking off Barca. Barca had followed him, but Venti hid behind Vennessa, relying on her reputation to make Barca stand down. Except that Barca didn't like standing down, so he did exactly what made sense to him to do, I guess, which was to purchase Vennessa and her entire clan and then imprison Vennessa. Venti offered to free her and her people the night before the final battle that the Lawrences had planned for them. Um, but she refused. She told him that we must fight and claim our own freedom. We cannot beg for it. We must not kneel for it. Freedom given freely is only a guise for another shackle. Venti was pleased with Vanessa's answer there and decided that he would help her because, gods. So, what was this final gladiator battle? The morning of the battle, Vanessa learns that she is going to be pitted against Ursa the Drake, the very dragon who chased her clan into Mondstadt to begin with. And I don't know how familiar you are with the Roman Colosseum, but at the point when you're in the Colosseum with lions, they're done with you for entertainment. They are more interested in watching you die. Except that Vanessa wasn't the only one who was lined up to fight Ursa the Drake. Lord Lawrence had actually made it so that her entire clan, including the children and the elderly and the sickly, would be pitted against Ursa. Any clan members who tried to escape were slain by the aristocracy's archers. He told Vennessa that if she could slay Ursa, she would not only win freedom, or I guess not slay, but defeat, She would not only win freedom for her people, but he would hand over the keys of the city and let her take over. He only made this promise because he was expecting her to fail, and also because some of the citizens of Mondstadt were like, hey, is this fair? And now we get to a little segment I like to call Never Tell Me That Venti Doesn't Help. He helps. He does. He just helps in a way that helps you grow so you do stuff yourself. So Vennessa, despite her grief, slays all of the hilly turtles under Ursa's control before she finally faces the dragon itself. Before Ursa can retaliate against her, though, Venti appears as Barbados, so, in his angelic attire, giving Vennessa the strength to defeat and drive Ursa away. When the battle is over, Barbados tells Lord Lawrence that he must hand over control of Mondstadt to Vennessa because she's held up her end of the bargain. Lawrence is like, fuck you, I'm not gonna do that. And from there, the revolution begins. Assisted by Barbados, the citizens of Mondstadt formed an underground resistance. This is the basis of the game Wind Trace, which has thus far had 3 runs as an event in Genshin. The premise of the event is that there are hunters representing the aristocracy, and there are the rebels representing the underground resistance. So Barbados had granted them the ability to, um, basically what you do in the game at least is you turn into a barrel. You use shape-shifting magic, which I believe is what Barbados did. He gave them like a little bit of shape-shifting magic because Barbados is a trickster. He's got some tricks up his sleeves. Not that he really has sleeves in his Archon form. It's okay. But anyways, at the head of the revolution is Vennessa, joined by the Dawn Knight Ragnavinder and the Gunhildr clan, who refuse to follow the path of the rest of the aristocracy into tyranny. Um, Ragnavinder is a traitor to the aristocracy, and yes, this is Diluc and Jean's ancestors. The tables were thoroughly turned against the aristocracy, and victory was all but official once their own soldiers abandoned them and joined the resistance. They did this because while they were, looking around, they found a treaty document that said that the nobles were going to sell them, the soldiers, as slaves to Rex Lapis once all this was, cleared up. Fearing for their own freedom, they decided that revolution sounded like a little more fun. The document was fake. It was not real. It was, however, made by Venti, which brings to my mind the image of him being like, hey, Do you mind if I make a fake document that says the aristocracy is gonna sell their soldiers to you as slaves? And Zhongli being like, yeah, sure. Why not? Not that he would have needed to ask permission. It's just funnier to me if they discussed it beforehand. So that's what I choose to believe. The holes in canon are yours to fill. So they defeat the aristocracy, and obviously, any revolution has some amount of rubble and chaos left at the end of it. So, once the aristocracy was overthrown and driven out, Vennessa led the reconstruction of the city. She established the Knights of Favonius to fight against anyone who would try to obtain totalitarian leadership of Mondstadt ever again. Naturally, she became the first Grandmaster and the first Dandelion Knight. Vennessa went from being a foreigner and a slave in Mondstadt to becoming what was basically the leader, the guardian of Mondstadt. Which, with great power comes great responsibility, etc., etc. Let's rewind for a second, right? Before Vennessa led the revolution against the aristocracy, before she drove Ursa out of the Colosseum, she watched her family be murdered by the aristocracy's archers, right? The ones who tried to flee, they were killed in front of her. She had to see that. She makes her big hero move, followed by another big hero move, and she rebuilds the city and she establishes a power of protection and has all this responsibility weighing down on her. And I can't imagine when she would have had time to mourn her family. And if Jean is anything to go on, as far as the responsibilities of Grandmaster are concerned, she never would have had time to. In the description of the dream of the Dandelion Gladiator, which is these gold shackles up here, it's described as other, even greater forms of bondage being the new protector of Mondstadt. When her duties wore her down, she would go to the domain we now know as the Eagle's Gate to meditate and clear her mind. We don't know a whole lot about Vennessa's life between establishing the Knights of Favonius and her death. It was pretty much just whatever business as usual ended up meaning. But as all humans do, she eventually came to her end. For her, it happened at the place we now call Windrise. During her final moments, Celestia looked kindly on her and all her heroic deeds, and she achieved something that very few mortals ever have, ascending to godhood. When she died, her soul turned into the shape of a falcon, like so, and ascends up to Celestia. The Windrise tree sprouts up and grows from the spot that it happens, and it appears to hold divine animo power within it. So, both literally and figuratively, Vennessa was immortalized as the Falcon of the West and as one of the four winds of Mondstadt. I think that Vennessa's story is super cool and super interesting. And yes, a little bit sad. Leave it to me to go researching these historical heroes in Genshin and finding the ways that they have that they have become sad in some way. But Vennessa is a really cool character, and I think it was really cool to learn about her. Like I said, pieces of her story pop up throughout Mondstadt a lot, so it was nice to like sit down and find the info. Thank you guys for listening to my ramble. But if you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below if there is any piece of Genshin Impact lore that you would like to see me dive into in the future. You can follow me in the links in the description box below, including my Twitch channel where we play Genshin Impact pretty much every Monday and Wednesday. Share this with somebody you think might enjoy it. And if you have not done so yet, subscribe.